What? Hello, I'm Mr. May. You may remember me from such computer science instructional videos as Inheritance, What's in it for me? And This, a name I call myself. Over the next 8 minutes, I'll go over the do's and donuts of computer science programming competitions. This is the life cycle of a programming problem, from when you receive it to when you're awarded points for successfully solving it. Let's follow an example problem through this life cycle and identify the common mistakes that are easily avoidable at each step. Notice that this question tells you what to name your .java file. Tip number 1, do name your .java file correctly. Remember, .java files should always be written in camel case. If you submit a .java file that is named incorrectly, then it will be judged incorrect. Also, the name of your class must match the name of the file. If your file is named +minus.java, then your class must be declared as public class +minus. If your file name and class name don't match, then your code won't compile and it will be judged incorrect. A programming problem will explain how the input data will be structured and what the program should output. Your task is to write code that processes the data and outputs the correctly formatted results. The input data will be provided to you in a .dat file with a name that corresponds to the problem. Tip number 2, do read the input data from the .dat file. The problem will also tell you the name of the .dat file you should use. The .dat file the judges use to assess your solution will have different test cases, but the file will have the same name, so your solution must process data from the .dat file. If you hard-code your solutions like this, then your solution will be judged incorrect. The judges will expect the .dat file to be located in the same folder as the .java file. But the folder that the judges put your .java file and their .dat file will not be the same folder that you put those files on your computer. Tip number 3, do not hard-code a path to the .dat file. If you hard-code a path to the .dat file, then your solution will be judged incorrect. Sometimes, a question might be ambiguous, or the example output doesn't match what the output section says it should be. In situations like these, you can use the clarification system to ask for clarification about what the question is asking. Our example problem says your solution should output the difference between two numbers, but it's not clear whether you should subtract the first number from the second or the second number from the first. This is a good candidate for a clarification question. Tip number 4, do use the clarification system to clarify confusing problems. All clarification questions and answers are public to everyone, so before asking a clarification, make sure to check whether someone else has already asked your question. Tip number 5, do check if your question has already been answered. The clarification system is only for asking questions about the problem. Do not use the clarification system to ask questions like, why was my solution judged incorrect? Tip number 6, do not ask questions about your solutions or judgments. Questions that are not considered clarifications will not be answered. When judging your solutions, the judges will compare the output of your solution to the problem's expected output. Tip number 7, do output your answers to the console using the system.out.println and system.out.print functions. If your solution does not output anything to the console, then it will be judged incorrect. Your solution must match the expected solution exactly. More is not better when it comes to correct solutions. Tip number 8, do not output extraneous or debug information to the console. You can use debug print lines when developing your answer, but make sure to remove them all before submitting your solution. If your solution outputs extra information to the console, it will be judged incorrect. After you write your solution code, you must submit it to the judges. The judges will compile your code and test it against their judge data. Tip number 9, do submit the correct .java file. Tip number 9b, do not submit the .class or .dat files. If you are submitting a solution to the +minus problem, then you should submit the +minus.java file. Do not submit the +minus.class or +minus.dat file. And do not submit the solution to a different problem. If you submit an incorrect file, then your solution will be judged incorrect. Once you have submitted your solution to the judges, they will compile your code and test it against their judge data. Tip number 10, make sure your code compiles before submitting it. If your code does not compile, then it will be marked incorrect. A successful solution scores 60 minus 5 times the number of incorrect submissions points. Each time one of your submissions is judged incorrect, that problem is worth 5 less points. Tip number 11, do not use judges as your compiler. Do not submit code that you haven't successfully compiled. Even when your code compiles on your computer, there are a few things that would cause your code to fail to compile on the judges' computers. In particular, if you're using a fancy IDE like Eclipse or IntelliJ, then they might be secretly adding code to your code that won't work on the judge's computer. Here are 2 things to look out for when using a fancy IDE. 1. Package statements. Fancy IDEs will automatically group your Java files into packages and add a package statement to the top of your code. If you submit code with a package statement, it will not compile on the judge's computer and will be judged incorrect. Tip number 12, do not put a package statement in your program. You can usually fix the package statement problem by moving your code into the root folder of your project. Number 2, weird include statements. You will need to include the java.io.star and probably the java.util.star libraries in your solution. This is normal and expected. However, some fancy IDEs have fancy libraries built into them. If your code imports one of those libraries, then it will not compile on the judge's machine and it will be judged incorrect. Even if you don't use any of the code provided by a weird library, simply the act of importing it will stop your code from compiling on a judge's computer. Tip 13, do not import weird libraries. Of course, you would never import a weird library, but sometimes your IDE will secretly import weird libraries on your behalf. If you make a typo that the IDE autocompletes to one of its weird libraries, then it will import that library for you. Fixing the typo is not enough to remove the import statement. You also have to delete the import statement from the top of your file. When using a fancy IDE, always double check your code to make sure it doesn't have any package statements or weird inputs. Or use a less fancy IDE that doesn't automatically import weird things. If you keep these simple do's and donuts in mind, then the only mistakes you'll make are the bugs you made on the way. Have fun and good luck.